Welcome to an EDPD 3340 lecture in our class Educational Foundations, and this could also serve for PPR review purposes. We are going to discuss Competency 12 under the standards for the PPR exam for teachers. Competency 12 focuses on reflective practice and professional responsibilities of teachers. One of the important parts of being an effective teacher is to be a reflective teacher. A reflective teacher works to improve their practice through professional development and continual learning experiences. In addition, a reflective teacher constantly considers whether she or he is using best practices in their work, and the best practices are often determined through educational research or through other effective teachers providing those best practices to the teacher. Furthermore, a reflective teacher has a growth mindset. They don't think that their ability is fixed at one point and that's the maximum level that they could ever achieve, but rather they can continuously improve and get better. We are going to now discuss cognitive learning theory and how it relates to pre-service teachers' background knowledge. So in the past in our course, we've discussed the importance of how background knowledge and activating students' background knowledge helps support future learning or learning new content information. Now we're going to consider how it also would apply to the adult learner, to the pre-service teacher, or to the teacher in practice. And so just like any type of learner, prior knowledge drastically influences the amount of new learning that can occur. When the learning is linked to what the learner has already learned in earlier lessons, the learner has a much easier time acquiring the new information, putting it into context, and saving it into the long-term memory. Moreover, when the learning is connected to prior learning experiences, learners learn at a much faster rate, and there's less of a need to reteach. So in general, activating prior knowledge is best practices, and this is important for pre-service teachers as well, and teachers who are in practice as well. And so the prior knowledge that pre-service teachers and teachers have comes from a variety of sources. One of the sources is what Lorty describes as an apprenticeship of observation. And in that sense, if you think about it, most pre-service teachers and basically every also practicing teacher probably had some form of formal educational experience. And so during their educational experience, they observed teachers as students themselves. So as Lorty explains, teachers as students observed other teachers giving lessons and maintaining the classroom environment from between 14,000 to 16,000 hours. So that's a significant amount of prior knowledge. Moreover, if you also think about it, pre-service teachers and active teachers also have the prior knowledge that they've learned through their college coursework and their training. While it's important for pre-service teachers to consider their former teachers as role models, pre-service teachers and also novice teachers should not blindly copy exactly how their former teachers taught them. Practices have changed over time, and so if, for example, the novice teacher learned something 15 years ago in first grade, that practice might not still be a best practice. For example, when I was a student, which was about 20 years ago, many times we were taught primarily through worksheets. We had a lot of drill. Sometimes they called it drill and kill because you would get tired of doing the drills. We copied a lot of vocabulary definitions straight from the dictionary, and that was the extent to which we learned new vocabulary words. We didn't actually utilize the vocabulary words in different contexts or write our own sentences with the vocabulary words. So anyway, there are practices that used to be considered beneficial for students, but recent educational research has shown has not been as effective as other ways. And so it's important that a pre-service teacher uses what they've learned as a student as a guideline, but that should not be an absolute way that they have to follow. So teachers can modify their practices based on what they've learned in their college coursework and in their pre-service training, while also applying what they've seen that has been effective for they themselves have seen as a learner, and they can connect those two together to provide the best outcome, which would be effective instruction. Teachers need a variety of types of knowledge to be successful. For example, first, teachers must have content knowledge. And so the content knowledge would be knowing the particular information of the grade or the subject they're teaching. So, for example, if you are a high school math teacher, you would need to know high school algebra, high school geometry, maybe even trigonometry. Or if you're an elementary reading teacher, you would have to be able to know and comprehend various types of text that students would receive in elementary school. The second type of learning that's important is that teachers must also have pedagogical content knowledge. And so that type of learning is basically how to best teach students and how to best teach students the specific content. So which teaching strategies for this lesson are most effective. A third type of knowledge that's important for teachers to have, is that teachers should also have a knowledge of the different types of learners and their characteristics. As we've talked about in our class, you will have all types of different learners from various academic abilities, various linguistic abilities, and various language backgrounds. Also, you'll have students from various cultures, and you'll have students that have a varying level of parental involvement and parental support. And so it's really important that as a teacher, you know the different types of learners that you could have in your classroom, and you know how to best meet their needs. A fourth type of knowledge that's important is general pedagogical knowledge. And so general pedagogical knowledge, or pedagogical knowledge, either way you pronounce it, general pedagogical knowledge involves primarily classroom management. So how can you effectively run a classroom so that you have a minimal time spent on transitions or a minimal time of instruction that's lost and a maximum amount of time that is devoted to learning into the specific instructional activity or active learning. And so part of this is also understanding not only how to manage your classroom, but also what motivates students and how to use that to best support their learning. A fifth type is the knowledge of educational context. So a teacher must know how schools, districts, communities, cultures interact and the relationship between each of them. And I guess you could also argue how the bureaucracy works and where for example, the lesson standards come from, or where do the teaching standards often get assigned. And that's often the strategies that teachers use often comes from the districts, but then the actual content standards come from the states. A sixth type would be curriculum knowledge. And so this would be when teachers know what specific materials and activities will be useful for that grade level, and also what sequence or what time span is expected to be devoted to each topic. Seventh, you also need to have, as a teacher, knowledge of educational ends, purposes, and values. So you have to understand the philosophy of education, the history of education, and the goals of education. Let's discuss reflective practices and learning to teach. John Dewey, who was one of the pioneers of educational theory and education in general, argued that without reflection, a learner does not truly learn. So little learning will occur. And so we have talked about this in the form of metacognition, how learners have reflected while they're reading a passage, for example, if they've comprehended the passage, or they've reflected after a lesson what concepts they feel are very clear versus what concepts are difficult. And so we as learners always are using metacognition and reflection. And the same thing occurs for teachers. People learn from their experiences. They consider also the consequences of their actions and their ideas. So based on the consequence that resulted, the cause and effect, people change that action or modify that action to make it more effective. Same thing for teachers. Teachers try out a teaching strategy, or they try out a lesson, and based on how that lesson goes, teachers will know whether they should continue to teach that lesson in that way, or should they remodify it completely, or should they just refine a few parts of that lesson to improve it. And so as a teacher, you have to constantly be reflecting on your abilities, primarily in your effectiveness of having students understand the content and learn. Warner, another educational researcher, argues that teachers should set goals, they should plan instruction, they should evaluate progress, and they should work to encounter more effective ways to teach in the future. So they should work to find ways to how they can make the lesson even better. So that's a more formal set of, or a formal process in which teachers can use to go through the reflection sequence. Another thing teachers must remember in terms of reflective practices and learning how to teach effectively is that teachers must understand theory and practice. So first, teachers must understand educational theory. So educational theory is what you're learning in your classes. It gives you a basis for where to start when you begin to teach. It helps you guide your lesson planning. Practice is the hands-on experiences you'll get when you're out in the field, either observing teachers, doing your student teaching, or when you start on the job as a novice teacher, a freshman teacher. And so this is where you're actually trying out new ideas or new theories in the classroom. And this helps you to refine theories based on what you need at that specific time. And so you learn which theories are most relevant to your types of students, and which theories will be the most successful or that you should use to meet the specific needs of learners in your classroom. Sean argues that teachers should reflect before, during, and after a lesson. And so as Sean describes it, teachers monitor and adjust, and it's based on the effectiveness of the lesson. So don't be afraid in the middle of a lesson to realize, well, this is really not working. I need to either change my method, or I need to go back and reteach something because my students have not picked up what I had wanted to teach earlier, and so they can't go on to the more complicated material, the more advanced material. So don't be afraid to monitor and adjust. And so you always want to have a gauge on if your students are interested or motivated in what you're teaching. Are they engaged? And also, are they understanding sufficiently what you are saying? And are they having sufficient amount of time to practice and significant practice opportunities, both with their peers and independently, to help retain this information and to store it into their long-term memory? There are different theories on the development of teachers. Fuller focused on the stages in which novice teachers develop. And Fuller broke it down into 3 different stages. The first stage in which a new teacher goes through is called the survival concerns stage. In this stage, the teacher is primarily focused on surviving. They want to successfully complete their first year of teaching. They're more concerned about whether their peers and their administrators, fellow teachers, and parents like them. And also, teachers are very concerned about whether their students are happy in their classroom. And so teachers who are just starting out often use that as a measure of their success rather than actually looking at how much students learned. Moreover, first year teachers also focus primarily on classroom management. That's one of the hardest concepts that really requires a lot of experience for teachers. And so, classroom management is one of the issues that first year teachers primarily focus upon because they know that regardless of how much they plan or how effectively they design their lessons, if they do not have good classroom management, their students will not be engaged and will not be in a safe and orderly environment to take in that information. The second stage that a novice teacher goes through is a stage in which the novice teacher focuses on their teaching situation. That is their main concern. So in this stage, teachers are no longer having trouble with classroom management. They feel pretty secure in that realm. And then they have more time and energy to focus on improving their lesson design, adding their instructional skills or techniques, learning new instructional strategies, and also developing new content material and learning how to best teach the curriculum and content material. The third stage a novice teacher goes through is called the pupil stage. So the novice teacher focuses in this stage primarily on whether or not each student is learning. The teacher is also primarily concentrated on building a positive classroom environment. Furthermore, the teacher starts to develop interventions and remediations for struggling students. So for our Tier 3 students on the RTI tier system, they also have more opportunities to develop enrichment activities for advanced students who need to be challenged with more rigorous materials. And so in this stage, you could argue that the novice teacher is starting to transition from being a novice teacher to an experienced teacher. Another educational researcher, Berliner, provided a different stage in which teachers pass through. And these stages began with the novice and ended at the expert level. And according to Berliner, novice teachers are different than expert teachers primarily because novice teachers view things at the surface level, but expert teachers have a more comprehensive or in-depth perspective, elaborate understanding of what is going on in the classroom. And so an example I thought of for this would be if a student you have complains of being sick often, but then magically that student feels better when it's time for recess or PE. And so a novice teacher, and I know I'd made this mistake myself, might be incredibly concerned that maybe this student has a chronic medical condition that happens at the beginning part of the day, or maybe the novice teacher, once they learn that the student is primarily choosing to get out of an undesired activity, which is classwork, that novice teacher might grow mad at that student and punish that student through consequences like sitting them out for recess. However, an expert teacher would already take this into consideration from day one and would have set as a procedure in the classroom that, for example, if students ever have to see the nurse or ever complain 2 or 3 times of being sick, then they, no matter what happens, no matter what the nurse says, or no matter what, how much better they feel at the end of the day, they still must rest during recess and PE time. And so an expert teacher would put that in as a procedure and be regularly teaching that to students and reinforcing that. And so students would know that they couldn't get out of classwork by pretending to be sick. Also, an expert teacher also could further know that these students are most likely also struggling with some kind of academic content concept. And so they're having difficulty, and that's one of their ways of acting out or reaching out. And so the teacher can also take into consideration how they can best um, remediate that content for that student so the student can build confidence and enjoy the material and find it relevant and find that they can be successful in completing that material. Berliner further explains that not all teachers will go through every single stage. So just because a teacher has been teaching for 30 years does not mean necessarily that they're going to be an expert teacher in the end. Rather, it's based primarily on the teacher's own efforts to get better. So in order for a teacher to progress through the stages, to leave the stage of novice and get toward the stage of expert, teachers have to be willing to learn new skills, to receive new training. They have to be regularly reflecting on their performance and using that reflection to get better. They have to improve their own skill set and their content knowledge through professional development and also through collaboration with peers and administrators. And they need to experiment, trying out new strategies and also determining whether these new strategies are more useful than the ones they've been using in the past. There are different forms of professional development and collaboration that teachers see as pre-service teachers or students, and also as active teachers who are working professionally in the educational field. As pre-service teachers, many times teachers receive field experiences, such as student teaching experiences, teacher observations. And so many times, as pre-service teachers, the students will observe the lesson, they'll take notes, and they'll reflect on the lesson based on the theories they've learned in college and they've learned through their own educational research, and then they'll reflect on it and maybe write up a report on that, on their opinions and their perspective, and then that they will receive feedback from their professor. Furthermore, during field experiences, pre-service teachers receive practical experiences as well. So they have the opportunity to collaborate with fellow educators, which is a really important part of being a teacher, is learning how to work successfully and collaboratively on a team with people who might have different perspectives or different ways of doing things or different working styles, but you still know how to get to the mutual goal of student success. Some universities and districts even partner to offer professional development schools, and these provide both pre-service teachers and also active professional teachers with professional development, educational real-world experiences, and also information on up-to-date educational research best practices. In addition, teachers will often go through mentoring programs, and this is essential to their professional development and their growth as an educator. So in mentoring programs, a veteran teacher is paired with a freshman teacher, and the veteran teacher works to coach the freshman teacher, providing that freshman teacher with feedback and giving that teacher ideas. Often, the veteran teacher will observe the freshman teacher's lessons and then have a reflection session with that teacher. Under the mentorship model, teachers support and encourage each other. Often, the veteran teacher will have a significant amount of experience teaching in that same grade level that that new teacher is now teaching. One benefit of this model is that it's a two-way learning process. Veteran teachers can also learn new ideas and up-to-date theoretical knowledge from their experiences with their new teachers. So both types of teachers, the new teacher and the veteran teacher, learn from each other. What research shows to be most effective is when teachers can collaborate in an emotionally safe environment. So in the ideal mentorship program, the mentor teacher would not report back to the principal unless the mentor teacher felt that there was a serious concern in terms of student safety or maybe even academic achievement. But let's say if the mentor teacher is worried about us about whether the teacher is doing enough relevancy in her lessons, or expressing the connection of the lessons and making it relevant to students' interests, the mentor teacher wouldn't go to the principal and say, this freshman teacher needs to work on their relevancy and they're not making the lessons relevant to students. No, the mentor teacher would go straight to the source and help that freshman teacher with that concern. And this builds up trust between the two groups. And so that way, the freshman teacher, if they feel insecure, they feel like they need additional support, they can feel comfortable asking questions and being vulnerable to that veteran teacher without having a fear that the veteran teacher will report every single little negative question or concern the freshman teacher has to the principal. Some other important collaborative activities for teachers are working on specific types of teams at the school-based level or campus-based level. The first type of team that teachers will often work with is their grade level team. And with the grade level team, often you'll have teachers that are teaching either the same content area of that grade, or there may be compartmentalizing, or sometimes another way to say it is departmentalizing, where maybe one teacher teaches social studies, the other teacher teaches math, what have you. But either way, the grade level team works together to collaborate on lesson plans, creating assessments, also maybe engaging instructional activities. All of these things the grade level team can work on together. Furthermore, if there starts to be a trend in the data in which, let's say, one teacher is stronger at teaching word problems in math, while another teacher is stronger at teaching computation in math, using data, there could be flexible grouping at the grade level. So students that need help with word problems will go to the teacher who's best at teaching word problems. And the students that are having trouble with computational issues in math will go to the teacher who's better at supporting computational growth. And so flexible grouping is often one of the up-and-coming, not reforms, but up-and-coming methods that many grade level teams are employing. A second type of team that teachers will often be placed in is called a vertical team. So a vertical team will be teachers that are teaching the same content subject, let's say science, for example, and you'll have teachers from various grade levels at the school working on that same team, and they all teach that same topic, that same subject or content area, like science that I gave as the example. And what's really important about vertical teams is that you pair at least teachers below, one grade level below and one grade level above, so that teachers can understand and they can discuss whether or not they are effectively providing the sufficient prior knowledge for it to be effective in the next grade level. So unfortunately, sometimes teachers might only teach one aspect of the TEAC, or the standard objectives, lesson objectives, and content objectives in Texas. And that could be a problem, because if they don't fully teach all aspects of that lesson objective, they might be doing a disservice to students when they go to the next grade level, and they might not be ready for the content level in that grade level. I accidentally copied this slide from the last one, but the main point I'd like to also reinforce is that vertical teaming is very beneficial, especially in terms of learning how to organize and sequence curriculum. And so the vertical teams help support teachers to know how and when they should teach a certain lesson objective. Furthermore, vertical teaming is also beneficial because as a campus, teachers that teach the same content subject can also think holistically about what specific subjects or what specific objectives do students need to improve on across the board. So if students are having trouble with inferencing in reading, and that's a problem that they've seen both in kindergarten, second grade, third grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. I'm just skipping a few in between, but either way, let's say you've seen it in several grades, then obviously as a campus they need to devote more resources to teaching inferencing. One thing to note about either grade level teams or vertical teams is that both are beneficial to teachers. It's an opportunity for teachers to provide mutual encouragement and support. It also builds up a collective team mentality in which teachers work together for a collective goal, and it's not a competitive situation where one teacher is trying to outperform the other, but rather it's all teachers working together to meet the needs of the students. But one thing to note is that, just like with any type of committee or any type of team or group, you want to make sure that it's an effective use of time, especially in terms of teachers, because often teachers have grading to do after school, or they have tutoring to provide to students, or their own families also to attend to. And so often when you have these meetings after school, it's essential that you make sure that they're effective use of time. And so as a team member, you can make sure that these policies are put into place. So the team should have a plan or agenda for each meeting. They should have a purpose that they set forward, including clear goals. They should reflect on both the overall overarching goal of the year for that team, but also the particular goal of that lesson, and whether or not they've met that goal, if they've discussed that topic enough, or they've come up with a strategy. Furthermore, a team should delegate roles to each person so that each person is involved and each person has a responsibility and has an active position in the team and can feel like they're having an important role on the team. Finally, teams also must reflect on their progress and, if needed, refine their goals based on whether or not they've been successful in accomplishing them. Hollingsworth, another educational researcher, also discussed how teachers can also perform research, and so the teacher can serve as a researcher, and that is its own model. And in this situation, teachers would research together and maybe experiment with different types of instructional strategies, and then reflect on the effectiveness on that using empirical data and research methods. Now we will discuss other educational actors and their roles. At the campus level, teachers have their principals. There are often two different principals depending on the size of the school. Normally, but not always, the assistant principal is primarily focused on discipline, classroom management, and the facilities, or management of the facilities, like the books, the materials, whether or not the areas are clean and whether or not the areas are safe for the students. The principals have a more overarching big picture perspective. They focus on the budget. They focus on the overall school environment. They also think about parent, school, and community relationships and how to foster those. And the principal is primarily the end appraiser of teachers, so their final appraisal. After principals, of course, above principals, is the district superintendent. This is the district level administrator. They're focused on district policies, the development of curriculum, the general philosophy of the school district and goals, how the budget will be distributed across different parts of the district, and the hiring of administrators. Moreover, superintendents also focus on the overall professional development requirements for all educators in the district, and they pick which teacher appraisal system the district will use. After the superintendent are regional educational support centers. And so at the regional level, for example, in Amarillo and Canyon area, we have Region 16. The regional educational support centers mostly are providing a consulting or supportive role, less of necessarily an administrative role, but more of a collaborative developmental role. And so they provide training, they offer services, they can provide testing or specific types of accommodations for certain types of students, but largely they provide professional development opportunities. So they provide regular amounts of training, and then also they are used to relay information from the state to the individual districts and the individual schools. Research shows that teachers benefit from joining professional organizations and through reading educational literature. For example, professional organizations such as Kappa Delta Pi or the Association for Supervision and Development are voluntary organizations that teachers can join. Sometimes they have a fee, sometimes they do not, and often they'll publish academic journals which provide research and best practices to teachers. Furthermore, they'll provide professional development through conferences and also network opportunities during these conferences. Even sometimes they provide job placement support. Another form of educational literature, apart from those journals for the professional organizations, comes from the Educational Resources Information Center. Basically, it's a database that has all kinds of free research articles that teachers could look up to see what would be an effective strategy to teach cooperative learning, for example. A third database that has specific data from empirical research, so research that has used statistical methods and used empirical numbers to quantify their success, is the What Works Clearinghouse. And I included a link to that. And so that describes what are the most effective curriculum programs and whether or not those curriculum programs and those strategies have been tested by statistical methods. Teachers will also receive significant campus-based development opportunities. Often they are called staff development, and this is normally school-based, where teachers will build on their skills learned in their formal professional development trainings that they've taken at the district headquarters or at the regional service center. Another way that teachers can support their campus-based growth and their campus-based professional development is through serving on committees such as the site-based decision-making committee. And so teachers can help serve a role as a consultant to provide feedback and suggestions to the school administrators on what programs students need and how to best utilize the resources of the school. There are other different types of committees. For example, I've served on a PBIS committee, which was Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports Committee. And so that committee was focused on how can they best create a positive learning environment for students and promote positive behavior rather than focus on negative consequences. And so we developed a whole campus-based positive behavior system. A very important concept that is often used in education is the concept of professional learning communities. These are based at the campus level, and they often include teachers, an administrator, a counselor, instructional coaches, and other types of educators. And these types of organizations, these learning communities, meet regularly. Often they meet each week. And the goal of these communities is to provide supportive collaboration and results. And so we'll discuss the results that they're trying to provide below. Also, the professional learning communities prioritize the establishment of norms of how they will behave as a committee, how will they work together to make sure that their goals are being successfully completed. They'll establish an overarching vision, and they'll also establish specific benchmarks or goals that they'll try to achieve along the way throughout the academic year. A key component of professional learning communities is that they focus on measurable results. They focus on assessment data, so standardized test results or data from teacher-based assessments or district-based assessments. They could also focus on other types of measurable results. So it could be results from student or teacher surveys, or they could look at the attendance percentages, or even the percentage of students that receive discipline referrals. And so all of this data is used to help determine how this committee, this professional learning community or PLC, can best refine instructional practices to improve educational outcomes at the school. And so once again, professional learning communities focus on measurable results. They focus on data. Furthermore, they have their main goals are to refine instructional practices so that students will learn. And so they ask these questions at each meeting. What do we want students to learn? How will we measure if students have learned that desired content? And how will we support students who did not successfully learn this the first time? What will we do next to remediate and support those students that are still having trouble? As a teacher, you will be evaluated and appraised, and so it's important that teachers understand the teacher appraisal system. In Texas, every school district has to adopt some form of teacher appraisal system to evaluate teachers' performance. Most districts have taken the Texas Education Agency's recommendation to adopt the Professional Development and Assessment System, or what many people call through its acronym PDAS. PDAS is a particular type of teacher appraisal system. Under PDAS, teachers get annually appraised each year by a certified appraiser, which would be a trained administrator that's gone through extensive training and has practiced rating hypothetical lessons, and their rating scores have been considered accurate, and so they've received their certification to be an appraiser. PDAS focuses on whether a teacher effectively does the following. Does the teacher effectively support student learning? Does the teacher adequately utilize classroom management and discipline? And does the teacher attend the sufficient amount of professional development to ensure their professional growth? One important aspect of PDAS is that teachers create a goal for the year or several goals with their administrator's support or approval. And so teachers will reflect on what areas they want to improve, often in the areas of instruction, classroom management or environment, and professional development. And so teachers will make goals in those areas, and then they'll share those goals with their administrator, and the administrator will either approve those goals or ask that the teacher thinks of some additional goals. When teachers at the end of the year get their summative appraisal, before they get their summative appraisal, they have to self-assess whether they have accomplished their goals. And teachers also have to provide evidence. So they have to use things like student achievement data, work samples from students' work, or examples of activities or lesson plans, maybe even videos or written documentation. All of these are examples that the teacher uses to explain whether or not they have been successful in meeting their goals. Then the administrator assesses the teacher's overall progress in obtaining a goal, or in obtaining those goals. Furthermore, the principal or some kind of administrator, sometimes it's the assistant principal, will observe the teacher performing one specific lesson and provide that teacher feedback on that lesson. And so that lesson and maybe other walkthroughs or small short observations of teacher lessons will be used by the administrator as another form of evidence to determine whether the teacher was successful in meeting their goals. If teachers score unsatisfactory in the PDOS system, the administrator and the teacher have to create an improvement plan. And the administrator has to give the teacher a significant amount of time and opportunities, including professional development and support systems, so that the teacher can build their professional abilities and ideally meet the specific goals. So in general, administrators have to provide a sufficient amount of support and growth opportunities for that teacher so that that teacher can ideally be successful in the long run. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation. I hope you've learned a lot about professional development and how teachers can use reflection practices in their practice as educators. Thank you very much.